Well, alright, everybody, I have returned back with episode 5 of Moon Knight. And the review and spoilers, as always, I'll be doing as I go along. And so, yeah, last week we left Mark and Stephen screaming at a hippo god. So, it starts off where you see like a cave that's got some water in it, and you hear a boy crying for help. Then you see a woman that comes into focus who sort of screams, "This is all your fault," which this becomes clear later on. Then you see her screaming and see the hippo god sort of screaming with Mark and Stephen screaming. Then you see Mark screaming and that, and he's in like the sort of office of the asylum and that, or the Dr. Arrow's office, where you hear him saying that he didn't shoot like Mark and that, because from like last week where he said he thought he shot him in that, or claimed he shot him, and Mark's going from sense to nonsense, and his brain is a pendulum swinging from sense to nonsense. And he tells Mark that he's in Pucknell Mental Facility in Chicago, Illinois. Yeah, he tells Mark that he's got like a fantasy of being a superhero and that, where Mark replies that you're not a real doctor and that, and where Dr. Arrow sort of says, okay then, well, we'll do it your way sort of thing, where he says he wants to talk about the hippo that Mark was telling him about. So, with asking Mark about the talking hippo, he does a hand gesture to do a swinging pendulum to say, is this nonsense or sense, or sense or nonsense? Well, anyway, Mark replies, it's nonsense and that. Well, Dr. Arrow, he finds this answer pleasing and that, and he says, oh yeah, we're making sort of progress and that. Then he gets like psychological with talking about people like building places in their minds to seek shelter from dramatic moments in their lives. Yeah, he says it's called inorganizing principle. Yeah, he says like it can make people like see things in their minds and that, like castles, mazes, libraries. And then Mark says psychic wards, where Dr. Harrow says, yeah, it could be, yeah. And then Dr. Harrow, he wants to go back to the conversation of the talking hippo that's a new character, and says it could bring Mark and Stephen sort of like together and break down sort of like the barrier wall and give them sort of understanding. And then he wants to talk about the little boy that he was talking about with Mark before he got upset, which might have been where he was kicking off and saying you killed me and you shot me and that. And but anyway, this triggers Mark, and like you find out later why. But he gets up and grabs the sort of glass pyramid paperweight and says he's okay and he's feeling great and he'll see himself out and that. Well, Dr. Arrow rings a little bell where the buttons underneath the arm of his chair that alert security that he needs them, and there's a bit of a disturbance going on. Well, security come in and like restrain him and that, but he's going a bit crazy and that. Tries to like stick the paperweight in his eye and that, and like Dr. Arrow, he's telling the security not to hurt him and that, and Mark to calm down, and that he's not Mark's enemy and that. Well, then the security staff he injects him in his neck, and then you see them like seeing the hippo god and sort of just calming down sort of thing. So she sort of comes in and like makes a joke about them being a bit too dramatic in that sort of, and then she asks them if they're twins, because she's expecting only one of them and she's seeing two, where like Stephen says yeah we're sort of twins and that, where then Mark says he thought he had been shot to death by Arrow sort of thing, where she replies to him that you are quite dead, and then Stephen sort of agrees with her saying yeah she's right, we died. Then the hippo goddess pulls out a note of paper and that, where she starts to read off it and that, where she welcomes the travellers to the realm of the Duwat, which is the Egyptian underworld sort of thing. Well, Stephen's got a pretty good idea of what's happening in that, and he knows that the hippo goddess is Taweret, who's the goddess of women and children. Then Stephen says that she is there to guide them through the afterlife and get them to the other side sort of thing. Well, Mark's a bit unsure of what's happening, and so the hippo goddess tells Mark that the afterlife is something that is recognisable to them, so they find it more easy to pass through it, where it's an asylum, and Stephen sort of like asks why is it an asylum, where like Mark says it's because they're like insane and that. Mark then says like Dr. Harrow was right, and Stephen does not know like this Dr. Harrow and that, and so he's a bit confused. So Mark goes through some doors expecting to just see some patients and that, where he sees he's on the deck of this boat, where you see it's sailing on sand instead of water. But anyway, well, after seeing this, Mark believes he's in the afterlife, and he asks where they're going. Where Stephen says they're going to Erut, the field of reeds. Yeah, now Erut is like their sort of heaven that the Egyptians believe you go to, but the hippo goddess says if the hearts aren't balanced right, they'll spend eternity in paradise sort of thing, but the hearts have to be balanced. Well, she like sticks her hands in their chests and sort of pulls out their sort of hearts, which are white stone like colour. But anyway, to see if their hearts are balanced so they can get into paradise, she takes them and weighs them on the scales of justice, and she uses the feather of truth to use as a counterweight to the hearts. Well, Stephen tells Mark that they have to be balanced before they get to the end of their journey to pass into the paradise and that. Well, Mark asks what happens if they are not balanced by the time they get to the end of their journey, where the hippo goddess says that the dead will drag them down into the thourts, which is the sand what they are like sailing in, where they will remain forever. Where then like Stephen and Mark sort of like go to the side and that, where Mark says to Stephen that they should kill the hippo and like steal the boat and just probably try and sail back wherever, where the scales then start moving a bit erratically, where the hippo goddess says like to come over in that way. She tells them that the hearts are not full and that, and to get them full she suggests that they sort of to go back into the asylum place where they can show each others sort of like their memories and find the truth, so they can like fill the hearts to balance the scales. As they're in there, Stephen asks Mark if he thinks Layla's alright, and Mark says yeah, but they need to get back to their well, sort of where Mark was shot by Harrow and where Layla is, sort of thing, in that reality, before she like goes on a suicide mission to stop Harrow. Well, Mark tries to convince Stephen to steal the boat and get rid of the hippo goddess and that, but Stephen says that they should just do what she says and just look through these sort of window doors to see some memories and that. we have a look at that, and like Stephen sees the episode 1 Moon Knight where he beats the crap out of the jackal in the toilets. Then they see where Stephen turned into Mr. Knight, and with the help of Khonshu turned the sky back to the time when the Egyptians did the map. Well, then Stephen sees Mark in the street, where he asks Mark what's with this, but Mark sort of brushes it off like it's no big deal, like he's been in this street. Well, you find out later on that there's more to this, but anyway. They then hear a boy crying for help, where Stephen sort of like follows where the sound's coming from and enters into this room where he sees a lot of dead bodies that are like zombies, that they find out, like, because Stephen guesses that it's the people that Mark's killed. Well, Mark admits, like, yeah, they are people he killed, but there was all like bad guys and girls who was up to no good, and Khonshu sent him to kill him. Well, as Mark's confessing this, the scales get a bit more balanced, so they start talking a little bit more, but then Mark, he looks across and he sees a little boy who he asks Mark what a little boy's doing in a room with the people we killed, and Mark says, no, you just leave it, don't even like talk to him, sort of like let's go sort of thing. Well, Stephen tries to like get the boy to come over and talk to him, but the boy sort of like runs off, where Stephen sort of gives chase sort of thing, tell him to come back, where Mark chases Stephen, where then Stephen sees the little boy run off into one of the rooms, where Stephen runs into the room and locks the door behind him, so Mark can't get in, where Mark's trying to get in, but because it's locked he can't get in. And so then you see Stephen, so he finds himself in this garden, which I'd have to say, if you want to know how Moon Knight or Mark Spector turned into Moon Knight and that, this is where you need to watch it from, because this basically shows you how he became Moon Knight and why he developed a second persona of Stephen. Well, Mark, should I say, developed the second persona of Stephen. So, as Stephen's walking in this garden, and he can hear Mark banging on the door, telling him to come back and that sort of thing, but he just ignores him, because he sort of like walks through and sees his mother like doing a barbecue and that, and it's a memory of Mark's sort of thing. But this is Stephen, so he doesn't remember this and that. But he sees himself with his little brother, or his little brother's drawing a fish and that, and he says to his little brother that he shouldn't like drawing and that he wants to go to hang out in this cave where they say like they're going out and that to play sort of thing, where his mum and dad sort of in the garden, where his mum tells them to like be careful and that, and for Mark to look after his little brother, where Mark sort of, or little younger Mark, agrees and that. Well, they get walking off on to this sort of like country bit where, and the younger Mark and his little brother all pretend to be the stars from that film that the psychiatrist Dr. Harrow showed him, called or that he watched, called Tomb Busters, where it's Stephen Grant who's the hero, Indiana Jones sort of like thing that they watch. Well, anyway, they keep walking, and like Stephen sees this dead bird's skeleton on the floor sort of thing, and it sort of starts to then rain. So Stephen sees both the boys sort of going into the cave and that, where he sort of follows them and that, but he notices that it's starting to flood a little bit and that. Sort of follows the cave down, shouting to the boys to get out and that, even though this is a memory that he's seeing, so they can't hear him. It's just like a video replay sort of thing. Well, gets so far in and that I'm getting quite deep up to his knees sort of thing. Well, it cuts to where you see Mark like walking around and that, trying to find a door to get into to get to Stephen. Well, Mark ain't having much luck of finding any door, so then it cuts to where Stephen is well up to his neck in water and that, and you hear like screams for help and that, and then you pretty much can guess what happened. And if you can't, so I think you find out. But then Mark sort of sees his mother in one of the door windows looking at him, where he steps back a bit sort of thing, and then he sees a door that's the wake of the younger brother who was called Roro and that, and you see like Mark walking and that, and then you see his mother who's looking real depressed, and you see like picture of little Roro, and the dad comes to comfort her, where then you see sort of Stephen who's wet and looks in a bit of shock and that, stood there watching sort of thing. Then Mark sees Stephen there and tries to like get him to come out of that room, but Stephen sort of hears and then sees the younger Mark coming down the stairs, where he stops, sort of thing, because his mother starts to like say to him, "It's all your fault why little Roro drowned," and that. And Mark's trying to like get Stephen to get out of the room and that, but little Mark runs up the stairs, where Stephen follows him up the stairs, where Mark also follows Stephen up the stairs, where Mark sees, where Stephen sees Mark having a birthday party with his dad with a cake and that, but the mother won't turn up. She's up in her room and she's not wanting to come down and wish Mark a happy birthday and that. Well, the younger Mark just blows out the cake, candles on the cake and that, and then Stephen goes up another flight of stairs because it's in a sort of memory sort of sequence, so it's not making much building structure sense. But anyway, he gets up to the top of the stairs, where he sees the younger Mark celebrating another birthday, where his mother has joined him this time, but she starts to like give him some grief about killing his younger brother and saying that he was always jealous of him, or he was always jealous of him. And to top it off, she says she should have known he would do something like what he did, and that sort of like tips the younger Mark to throw his birthday hat sort of down, and he runs up the stairs, where Stephen is like saying, "Oh, what you doing, mother?" and that. And the younger Mark gets up to the stairs, which is his sort of bedroom, where he goes in, where Stephen follows him, opens the door, but before he can open it any further and walk in, Mark grabs him and pulls him outside, sort of thing, in a memory sort of dreamscape sort of way. And they're out on the sort of streets, where as Mark's getting Stephen away from the door sort of thing, so because he wanted to go back, Stephen sees a younger Mark, but a little bit older, leaving home, where his dad sort of like trying to stop him, but a younger-ish Mark says like it's too much and that, and his dad hadn't sorted it out with his mum, so he's leaving, where Stephen sort of like gets away from Mark, because Mark's trying to get him into a door out of the street memory thing, so he can't see it. Well, Mark sort of sees that like the dad says that he doesn't want to lose another son, where Mark, youngerish self, is sort of like tearful, but he's still leaving. And with that, then Mark sort of rugby tackles Stephen into a memory of when he was helping his mercenary mates out on the sort of archaeologist sort of dig site that his partner sort of double crossed him on. Well, sort of Stephen sort of has a look round and that. Yeah, Stephen sees sort of the carnage and all the bodies and sort of asks if it was Mark, or he sort of refers to it that Mark probably killed them all, where Mark is not happy. He's like a bit gutted that Stephen would believe he'd be such a cold-hearted killer, where he sort of tells him how it happened. Mark proper goes into a bit of detail, saying like he was discharged from the military for going AWOL and that, and then because he'd done that, the only work he could really get was for mercenaries, where he's working for a CEO called Bushman, or his CEO was Bushman, and they was doing a raid on this tomb that Layla's father was heading up, and Bushman apparently didn't want any witnesses, where Mark disagreed and said like he wasn't going to be a part of it, where he was sort of killed that night himself. So then Stephen sees Layla's dad, where they say his name, but I didn't write it down. I can't remember because it was quite a crazy, weird name. But anyway, Mark tells Stephen that he tried to save everyone, but he was unsuccessful in that, where Stephen then asks, then what did happen to you then, Mark? Where Mark points to this temple where you see a trail of like blood, and where he drops his gun walking up to this temple, and then you see where they get to the entrance of this temple and walking sort of thing, where you see Marco's been shot in that, and he's bleeding out, and so he's thinking of ending it right there, save a few hours of pure torment of your bowels being spilled out. Well, just before Mark pulls the trigger in that, he hears Khonshu's voice saying to him, what a waste, and that, and then he sort of like convinces him that he needs someone to be his vengeance and that, to guide the travellers of the night home sort of thing. But Stephen says to Mark that Khonshu took advantage of him in the state he was in and that, but Stephen, he says, well, he gave him life because he was gonna die because he was all shot up and that, and he can do what he does best, which is like killing people. And they sort of like see the shut up Mark, anyway, who was laid there half dead, taking his time whether to be Khonshu's or Khonshu's vengeance and that. And he finally agrees and that, because Khonshu sort of like asks him what he's waiting for and that. And well, the scales get a bit more balanced than that, and then you see where the eyes of the half dead Mark turn white, and he starts to rise, where Khonshu is fucking giving him the powers and the Moon Knight suit, and saying that he's now Khonshu's vengeance of Moon Knight. Where then Stephen hears some baboons and that, where he thinks they're coming out from outside, so he has a look, but it's on the deck ship or boat that the hippo goddess is on and that. And she tells them like there's a bit of a disturbance going on, because there's unbalanced souls are being condemned to the sands, where you see like soul bolts flying down from the sky and that, and landing in the sand. And she's saying like they're being condemned to the sands before their time. Well, Stephen and Mark realise that these souls are getting sent down early because Harrow has got the god Ahmed free, that can judge people for sins that they've committed before or after, and so they're judging them early and sending them down, where Stephen and Mark, they want to go back to the land of the living, where the hippo goddess, she says she can't, and even if she could, they still have like a bullet or two bullets in their body, and they don't have any healing powers because they haven't got the suit that Khonshu give them. Well, they say if they could help them, and Stephen asks if she can get word to Layla to help free Khonshu from his little stone statue. Well, the hippo goddess asks if they want to be tied back with Khonshu, but they don't really. Mark says he's not wanting to, but it's the only shot they have to stop Arrow. Well, she says that Saros is the only place that his gate will be open, but he won't like it. Well, she says to him that she'll do it anyway, and grabs the like steering oar handle thing that like is like the steering wheel, but it's not a wheel. It's a like pole handle that she grabs and pulls, which sets the course to like Seros is gate that turns really quickly in that because do it dramatic style and that. She then tells them like that the scales still aren't balanced, so they need to get back in there and sort out what memories they need to show each other to get the scales balanced. Well, get back in, and Steven says that they want to unlock memories, that they should go back to the bedroom where Mark dragged him away from, where Mark says he didn't really want to go, and it's not worth going back there for. Where Stephen asks him sort of like, tells him you'll lose everything if you don't go back there and that, and if you don't stop Harrow, then Layla might be killed, and it'll be your fault, sort of thing. Where then Mark sort of starts screaming that no, you can't make him go back there, and he won't go back there. He starts slapping his head and that, bit of like Rain Man style. Well, he keeps slapping himself until he slaps himself into Dr. Harrow's office, sort of thing, where Dr. Harrow tells him to calm down and stop hitting himself and that, where Mark sort of like stops and that and looks at Dr. Harrow, checks his neck where he asks if he'd been injected by them, and according to this sort of scene, it must have been his imagination, because he hasn't got a busted nose, which he does have in them scenes, and Harrow says like that he's not allowed to inject patients with any sort of sedation sort of injections, and claims that they've been talking for hours and that, and the sessions been real good and that, and got quite far in that. Well, you see the sort of staff security at the back, and then Mark sort of checks his nose, because as I say, he had a busted nose in the scene where he gets injected and that, but he hasn't got a busted nose and that. And Dr. Harrow sort of starts pouring a glass of water out, and sort of passes the glass of water to Mark. Well, Mark gets the cup or glass of water and sort of stares in it for a bit, whilst Dr. Harrow is asking him about Stephen and that, and he wants to know if Mark created Stephen because of all the awful things that he has done, or did Stephen create Mark to punish the world for what she did to him as a young boy, for killing his, or for accidentally getting his younger brother drowned, where he asks him if he could open up to Stephen, and if he could do that for him, and that, where then you see the young Mark, when he went up into his room, clearing out his table of his stuff and throwing it on the floor, where he like sits down because he's still mad about his mum giving him grief about him accidentally getting his younger brother killed. And then you see Mark looking and Stephen looking around the room, saying he can't remember this exactly and that. Well, the mum's banging on the door, telling Mark to open up the door, and that, but he's in a bit of a frightened state and that. And then, like, you see him sort of saying she's not his mum and that, and then he's goes off into a sort of trance where he then starts acting like Stephen, where he starts to tidy up his room and starts talking like English sort of style. Well, Stephen starts to realise that he's the made up memory, just like in Total Recall, where Quaid is the made up memory and Hauser is the host of the body. Because then he reads on the poster about when danger is near, Stephen Grant has no fear. And that's when he proper realises, oh, he is the made up sort of persona memory. Well, then the door sort of flies open and the man comes in saying about Mark has to learn his lessons, he has to listen, and that, where Mark is now in his little Mark is now in his little Stephen persona, and he's tidying up his room and that. Well, the mother gets his belt off his sort of dresser and then tells him that he needs to learn a lesson, sort of thing, and then proceeds to go towards him, where older Stephen can sort of see what's going to happen, where then Mark grabs him and sort of takes him out of the room, where Stephen wants to see exactly what is going to happen, but Mark gets him out just before he sees the real action go down, the beating go down. So he has him outside and that, and sort of tells him like he doesn't need to see that. Yeah, Mark says, you're not meant to see that. What's the point of you if you see that sort of thing, what Mum did, but well, anyway, Stephen gets a little bit sort of frustrated in that, where he punches Mark in the face and that, and hurts his hand, but yeah, he hits Mark with a decent punch, and then he says, "The point of me," meaning Stephen, "what to be your stress ball," as in he's a bit gutted that he's found out like he's an imaginary sort of person who's there just so he can relieve the stress of having a sort of violent mother. Well, Mark tells him that he did it for his own good so he could have a normal life and think that his mother was like nice to him and not have to remember what she did. Then he goes on to say that Stephen still remembers her being alive, and that where Stephen denies she's dead and claims she still is alive, where Mark says no, she's not, and that, where then Stephen starts to like say he was out, and that just repeats the phrase let me out, where then he's in the Dr. Harrow office sort of thing, and he's got the glass of water in his hand where he's saying let me out, and then he sort of wakes up, gets surprised by Dr. Harrow looking at him and throws the water in his face. Bit of a comedy moment, well played in that. Like, and well, Stephen's all apologetic in that, and he tries to like wipe his face and that and dry him, but Dr. Harrow is like okay about it, and he's like, "Oh, Stephen, I'm glad to see you again." Where Stephen gets a bit confused because he sees Harrow as the dude who was trying to free Ahmed, Greek goddess, who's the Egyptian goddess who can judge people's sins, past and present, sort of thing. Well, Stephen gets a little bit nervous and that, sort of like remembers the room a bit. Well, Dr. Harrow tells Stephen to calm down, and he's his doctor and that. Where Stephen's like, "Oh yeah, you're a doctor now. You've gone up in the world," and then he's like, "Oh yeah, look at that." Where he sees Harrow's diploma, where you're like, "Oh yeah, you are in that," but and then he starts to like talk about Dr. Harrow's appearance, saying he looks a bit like Ned Flanders, where like Ethan gives a look as to say, "Oh, come on, just calm down," and he's like saying like he's was worried that he was never going to speak to Stephen again. Well, Dr. Harrow then asks Stephen if he'd talked to Mark, and if Mark had like opened up to him, where Steven says like he was talking to Mark, but he was lying to him. And then Dr. Arrow says when Stephen first like came into the asylum, that he didn't think he'd be able to even acknowledge Mark. Well, Stephen can't remember signing himself in, but Dr. Harrow tells him that he did after his mother died, where it triggers Stephen, where he's saying, "Don't say that," and Dr. Harrow, he says, "Oh," apologises, says he must have been mistaken, and he can phone his mother to have a talk to, and that thinks it'll do him good. Well, Stephen's a little bit unsure, tries to make some excuses and that, but Dr. Harrow gets the phone and that, and says like, "Oh yeah, we'll get your mother on the phone," where he pretends that he's talking to his mother, where he then says, "Did you want to speak to your mother?" Where he sort of slowly gets the phone and then admits that his mother's dead, where then you hear the ringtone, or dead ringtone, darling tone, that like is just in the handset. Then it cuts to where it's his mother's wake, where she's passed away. Now, is this the real life where you find out this is a memory that he's in, or is it real life in being in a psychiatric ward and that? But either way, as long as I get some masculine action, where a bit of masculine action comes up at the end. So you see his mum's wake, where his dad's there, and his dad goes to the window and he sees Mark outside, and he's in a bit of a state. Well, he's drinking from a hip flask and that, and the dad tries to like wave him inside the house, but Mark shakes his head and he's not having none of it, and he walks off, where his dad sort of like looks but stays in, doesn't go out and follow him, where then Mark walks to the end of the street, where Stevens now is watching the memory that Mark previously said he couldn't remember him stood in a street. Well, he walks to the end, then takes off his Jewish cap thing, because Moon Knight's Jewish, and then sort of like in a fit of emotional rage starts slapping it on the floor and that, where Stephen's seeing the memory of Mark doing this. Then he grabs it and starts holding it, and is saying about his mum and his boy and that. Well, he then sort of goes into the moonlight trance sort of thing where he ends up being Stephen, where then Stephen is seeing his memory of himself where he's lost and he doesn't know where he is. And so he gets out his phone, phones his mum, who we know now is dead, and makes out that he's talking to his mum, getting directions, and he's saying he's not quite sure where he is, even though he's in America, and he thinks it looks a bit like England, and so he's getting a bit confused. Well, at this stage, Mark joins Stephen, where Stephen sort of sees himself walking off, trying to get back to London. And then Mark tells Stephen that it was this point in his life that their lives started to merge with each other. It was 2 months ago, and so like it's been 2 months where they've been sort of getting each other where they're having blackouts. Then Mark tells Stephen that he could not face his dad after what he did with the accident with his younger brother and that. And Stephen sort of tells Mark that it wasn't his fault, he was just a kid. Shouldn't really blame himself that harshly, and that it was an accident. Well, then the ground starts to shake, where Stephen, he's like, oh look, it's the gate of Azurus, I think, Azurus, but anyway, so they start to like head towards the gate and that, where when they go onto the, well, this, I should say, they start heading towards the front of the boat, where they see the hippo goddess looking at this gate that should be open but it's shut, and she's saying like she's never seen it shut that tightly before, and it's the gate to get them back to the land of the living, but it's shut so they can't get in there, but their journey has ended, because the scales wasn't balanced. The unbalanced souls of the Dunwat will come and claim their souls by dragging them into the sand. Well, the hippo goddess, she's like, well, sorry you guys, like, I don't make the rules, I just follow them, and sort of leaves. Well, then you see the soul of the unbalanced zombies sort of start rising out of the sand and that, where they start climbing on board of the boat, and Mark tells Stephen to go hard and that, he'll deal with it. Well, Stephen hides behind the scales and that, and then Mark has like 3 opponents and that, and first one comes at him, who's like a female with a axe handle, I think it is, and you're like, oh no, it's a baseball bat, but it could have been an axe handle. But yeah, she like swings but misses, and Mark pushes her away and that, where then he punches a like sand dude in his face that like shatters his like face with like sand, and then he turns to his other side where another sand zombie, so unbalanced of the dune what is coming at him. Well, whilst he's gonna fight him, the dude who got his face punched regains his face and then puts a rope around Mark's neck and starts choking him, where the other dude comes towards him, but Mark punches him in his face, knocks his like face off sort of thing, but he's still coming towards him, and they've like grabbed him and they're getting him to the side, where Mark sees this and he's like, oh no, sort of thing. I mean, Stephen sees this and he's like, oh no. Where then Mark is right at the side that he's hanging right over, and they're about to push him over, where Stephen grabs the steering or handle that he pushes it extremely to the left, and so the boat starts steering to the right. That makes the boat sort of go to a side and sort of puts the unbalanced souls of the Dunwat zombies sort of off balance, that they sort of tumble back, where then Stephen, he sees like Max okay, and he pushes the oars handle back to where he steadies the boat, but the female unbalanced soul of the Dunwat zombie grabs the baseball bat and smashes Mark in his face, that like knocks him out sort of thing, and then they sort of grab his arms and drag him to the side, where they're going to push him over, where then Stephen mans up and thinks, well, if I'm a part of Mark and Mark's a part of me, then I can fight like Mark, where he comes out and smashes one of the dudes in the neck, that like gets him to fall down, and that, where he picks up the baseball bat, runs towards the two sand sort of Dunwat creatures, smashes them both in, like takes the heads off and that. Then he like calls six because he likes cricket more, and Mark, he's like a bit shocked in that how Stephen did so well. Well, as Stephen talking to him, the other sand creature sort of comes towards him, but Stephen turns around, smashes the creature in its leg so it goes to one knee, and then smashes its head off. And then when it's on the floor, he just sort of goes mental on it and starts just clubbing it, where he clubs it into a pile of sand. Where then Mark is really amazed, where Stephen is like, yeah, gives him the thumbs up. But as he gives him the thumbs up, a sand creature comes up, grabs Mark and tries pulling him over. Well, he's half over, and so Stephen runs towards Mark to help him by trying to push the sand zombie creature off him, but the sand zombie creature grabs Stephen and pulls him, lets go of Mark and pulls Stephen over, where they both fall onto the sand and that, where Mark sees this and shouts like to Stephen, where Stephen, right, but Mark's still wants to see if he's okay, where he's telling him to run, because Stephen gets up, but Mark's trying to tell whoever's steering, but I don't think anyone's steering, to stop the boat and that, or the ship, depending on whatever it's classed as, and it's still carrying on, and then Stephen starts getting heavy legged whilst he's trying to catch up, and then starts to turn into a sand sort of statue, where he finally does turn into a sand statue sort of thing, where you see Mark then in a rage trying to stop the boat by telling whoever's steering to stop the boat, where then you hear the scales have levelled and are in balance now, so you see the hippo goddess come out and say about the scales being balanced, where then Mark is transported into a field where he looks around and it's a sort of orangey sort of field, where it pans back to him, where this is supposed to be like paradise. Yeah, the field of reeds that they were talking about, where you hear some music going on, an old song about having a soul, and it pans out where you see sort of Mark just looking in the field of reeds, and then it ends. So hopefully episode 6 should be full of masculine action. I'm hoping. Like, I don't care if it's a dream world or made up, as long as I see some masculine action, which I'm hoping there will be. Because he's got to stop Arrow and that, get back to the land of the living. Yep. I reckon there should be a right good finale episode of the 6th episode. And I should be reviewing that with spoilers, and hopefully I'll be doing it a bit quicker than I did this one. But anyway, thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.